I really get to clicking, but I'm looking for a sister to revive and win a kiss. If you want some love, just let me know.
Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today I thought in War Thunder we would look at the ground forces tech trees from each nation and try and find a hole in each of them that we can fill with any specific vehicle from said nation. So the idea is to try and fix or, patch up the existing rug that we see before us that is a tech tree to make sure that when players grind through the tech tree, they don't hit areas where they are either lacking compared to other nations or just straight up hit a point where they cannot progress further, without having to research, other types of vehicles. So the idea is we're looking for vehicles across the nations which are slightly different compared to others and stuff like that. So, let's have a look at the Americans and the holes that I personally identified. So the first one to have a look at is the medium tanks from 3.7 to 4.7. Now generally this isn't really an issue because the majority of nations have these gaps as well, but America has a pretty, expansive tech tree. So this hole is quite large, and then on top of this, you also have a hole from 2.7 to 4.7 with the M4A3 105 to the M6A1, moving from the, kind of the howitzer tank to the heavy tank. Now, since you have this gap, I think there are two choices that you could fill this role with, and the first one is just the M4A4. So if you don't know what the M4A4 is, it is a more modern version of the M4 Sherman that we see in game. It has a slightly different hull, and you can actually see the M4A4 if you go to different trees. So the Firefly Scorpion, I believe the hull of this Firefly is the M4A4 hull that you see. The only difference is, of course, the M4A4 standard has the 75 on it. Now, another reason why I would like to see the M4A4 in the game is because it had a similar setup to the Cromwell Mark V RP3, and it was called the M4A4 Tulip. So it was basically one that was used by the British and also had rockets mounted to it. So I thought that would be kind of cool as a double dipper. Now, I don't necessarily think this one is required, just because the hole is not too great between these two vehicles, but the M4A4, in my opinion, should be put in the game. Now, to address this gap here that we see, the only one that for me would be cool if we don't look at higher or larger artillery pieces is the M4A4 once again, but with the 105 howitzer. So we are just straight up upgrading the Sherman from an M4A3 to the M4A4, and therefore, why not? It makes sense to put it in that gap. Now, for me, that, the gap there is an issue, but it isn't as large as another gap in the American tree. 3.3 to 6.0 for their light tanks is a large gap. Now, a lot of people use the M22 or the M24 and just up tier it, and that's completely fine to do. They're both great vehicles, but why not create an actual vehicle in this gap which could fit there instead of having to purposely up tier yourself in lighter vehicles? So generally when we look at this, part of the tree, what we're looking at is light tanks or scouts tanks as they're used in the game. So we're looking for something which has maybe decent firepower, decent speed, not a lot of armor. So the ones to have a look at is machines that we've actually talked about before. So this is the Chilean M24 Chaffee. It's got itself a 60mm hypervelocity medium support gun, and it's supposed to have similar penetration values to a 90mm. So it's you basically take a Chaffee and you put a 60mm high velocity gun on it. Is basically the way that this thing is seen. So this would just be a direct upgrade over the M24 Chaffee that we see with the 75. This 60mm would be a lot more deadly, but it still, would struggle with having not as much speed as other vehicles, and also maybe having issues with reload, since of course, the size of the breach inside of the Chaffee's turret. So for me, this could fit really well in the American tree. The issue is, of course, this is a Chilean modification, so some people may not be happy with the addition of it in the American tree and would rather have it in some form of South American tree, which I can understand because there's some interesting Brazilian tanks we could add, such as the X1A. I believe that one's Brazilian, I might be wrong about that, but anyway, there is a semblance of a tree that you could make there. So instead of this one, why don't we have a look at the T-37? Now, this is a vehicle I talked about a few weeks ago, or maybe a week ago. This is the predecessor to the Bulldog, the M41 that we have in game, the M41A1, I should say. This vehicle right here. It's pretty much the prototype of it. It's got a 90 on it. It was made after the war, and they were looking to upgrade the chassis, so it makes sense to put this in the tree. Now, they actually made an upgraded version of the T-37, which is actually the T-41, which is pretty much just the prototype for the Bulldog. So when I look at this vehicle, it's got not as much speed as the Bulldog. It's got not as good of a weapon, so it should be at a lower BR. And also on top of this, I talked about in a previous video how I would like the T-37 to be an event vehicle, because I think it would fit well. Well, this would be its standard tech tree equivalent, or the Bulldog would be as well. So this vehicle would come in around 5.7, maybe 5.3, and you could just stick it here, and it would fill the gap, at least somewhat, in the American tree. So the next tree to have a look at is, of course, the Germans, and the one thing that the German tree is really lacking, same with a lot of the other trees, is light tanks. You know, if you actually have a look through the trees, light tanks are incredibly sparse. You have the RU-251 at 6.7, and then you technically have something like the Baglette and the TAM at the top, but when we actually look at more lower tiers, it's really not there. You know, the only things that you could maybe say are kind of a semblance of a light tank would be this, the Puma, the 2342, but overall, from, let's say, 2.7 to even, 8.3, because, the RU-251 is a premium vehicle, meaning that, it doesn't come standard, so it's not in the tree, which is why I advocate for a tech tree equivalent for the machine, because, I want more light tanks, and on top of this, you have a whole set of mechanics that you're keeping away from players by making them premium. But anyway, I think we need to have some vehicles laced in the German tree which have some light tank capabilities. Now, another thing also is this has 5 lines of vehicles in it. So does the German tree. But what is interesting about the German tree is you have 2 lines of tank destroyers. What I would advocate for is to meld the 2 lines of tank destroyers together, and then from there, actually make a light scout tank part of the tree, or you could add it to the AAs. It really depends on what you want to do. So, what are the competition for the light tanks for Germany? Well, you pretty much have the Weasel. So the Weasel is an armored weapons carrier. It's designed for German light air transportable ideas. So you drop it in with a bunch of people who have either air landed or moved down, and the reason for this is so it gives you basically anti-tank support, is the best way of putting it, at least this one. There are many different versions of the Weasel. Basically, the Weasel itself is this platform that you see here. It's this hull, and then on top of the hull is what's mounted the weapon. So you can see that this one has a machine gun. It also has either a tow missile launcher or something similar to it. And then you have versions which have a 25mm gun or a 20mm Rheinmetall on it. You can see the ATGM launcher back here. You can see the 20 or 25mm here. Now, these generally have a crew of 2 or 3, so their survivability isn't very high. They have absolutely no armor on them. They're designed, as I said, very similar to how you would see like the Tetrarch or the M22 back in the day. Very similar to how these would be used today. So Yeah, I think because you have so many different versions of the Weasel, because the actual platform itself is the Weasel, not, as I said, the armament, that you could put these at different BRs through the trees and give Germany some scout vehicles, and they wouldn't be overpowered because it would all be depending on the armaments. These things are pretty fast, but not crazy fast, and if the issue is that they're too small, well, we have the R3 now, we have the L333. So these things aren't that small compared to those machines. On top of this, there is also the Weasel 2, which looks more out of Warhammer 40k, but this is a slightly larger, once again, crew 2 to 3, with the same idea where you plop the gun on the top. So yeah, you could easily sparse ATGM launcher Weasels through the tree, included 20mm and 25mm versions of it, and even if you wanted to do one at really low BR, you could always just add one with a machine gun. The question a lot of people are gonna, be coming up with is, well, aren't these things too modern? Well, now that we have stuff like the R3 T20 at 3.3, which is pretty much a 1980s, 1990s vehicle, I believe it's a 1980s vehicle, then, all bets are off. In this video, I'm using the game's rules, I'm not using my own personal rules, and therefore we can make these, concessions. So, after that, the other machine that could be thought about as some light tank material, but I don't think people would be generally happy with it, would be some Leopard prototypes. So, the RU-251, a lot of its design, a lot of its focus when it comes to its prototype build, you can definitely say that the Leopard 1 definitely took ideas from the RU-251, since the RU-251 never really got off the ground. You can even see it in this Leopard 1 prototype with the shape of the turrets, with the shape of the hull. So the idea would be, as a tech tree equivalent for the RU-251, you throw in a Leopard 1 prototype, which is a little bit lighter, doesn't have a lot of armor, only has the 90mm, not the 105, and, Bob's your uncle, right? So that could be the scout tank around 6.7. I would personally prefer that the Leopard prototypes are used to replace the Panther 2 and the Tiger 105, but just for this, if we are looking for a tech tree equivalent for the RU-251, which we should be and should always be, the Leopard 1 lighter prototypes is the way to go. Another machine to have a look at is the Marder 1A3. This is once again a modernized IFV, and it has a 20mm on the top of it, along with a Milan launcher. Now, my advocation here for a lower tier light vehicle would be to remove the Milan launcher and just keep the 20mm. So this thing would not have a lot of killing power, but it would still have, quite high penetration when it needed it. Maybe you could limit the ammo like they do on certain top-tier machines, and you could put it at a lower BR, so therefore it would be able to fit in. Here's another picture of the Marder as well, with a different ATGM launcher, showing that they could do different ATGMs on it. But for me, yeah, I would like to see the Marder 1A3 at lower BRs without the ATGM launcher. That would fill the gaps that we have when it comes to light vehicles for the Germans. The Weasel and the Marder, I'm sure, will eventually come, but right now we just don't have them. The next tree is, of course, the Soviets, and there is only really one issue for me when I look at the Soviet tree, or at least a glaring issue, because there is a few. When you look at this tank, the T-26-4 to the T-28, that's quite a big jump. The BT-7 to the T-50, pretty big jump. And then, of course, you have a few more, such as this line, 2-3 to 4-3 to 5-3. You've got a big gap here. I have no idea why these two are connected. But the glaring one that I've seen, for a few years is the ZSU-37 to the ZSU-57-2. This is a 3-0 gap for AA, which is kind of crazy. And since we've had a resurgence of CAS over the last bit, now that people have worked out how to use them, especially around the 4.7 BR, because you have all of the Americans coming in with their, P-51s, P-47s, and then of course the Italians coming into the game with their stuff, the Japanese getting a lot of bombs to different planes now. It is required that we have some form of machine between these BRs radars. And on top of this, the ZSU-37 is not a good AA. So it would be, if this was a good AA, which could be up-tiered efficiently, yes, I would say, okay, that's fine. The problem is it can't. It's not very good. So we need to find a machine which fits between here. Well, we have one. It's called the ZSU-37-2. And the article written here by Sly Old Snoopy basically goes through the machine itself. And the best way to describe it is that it's based on the SU-100P chassis, and it has two 37mm guns, which are technically radar guided. So if you don't know what the SU-100P is, it's this machine here. It's a rocket machine with a 100mm gun on it. Very fun to use a lot of the time, unless there are planes about when they absolutely annihilate you. But yeah, so you take that chassis, you build kind of a turret on top of it, you slap two 37mm to it, and then you add radar to it, or as we see it in game, you know, radar-guided systems. Now the problem is during testing of this machine, the radar-guided systems, which is the Baikal RPC, it couldn't track air targets effectively. Like, it wasn't good at its job. So they were, in the second round of testing, they decided to switch to a mobile radar, or OB, for the control of the ZSU, which meant that it was a hell of a lot better. So, obviously that's a problem, right? This machine, if we put it between 4.7 and 7.7, and it has radar, this will be the lowest machine that has, you know, radar-guided AA for it. And that means that instead, what I would advocate for is we put in the first version of it, the one with the Baikal RPC, and take away its radar, and just basically say it didn't work very well, therefore we're not going to put it into game, we're going to chop that top off, so chop this bit off, because this is basically the radar portion of the machine, and just make it a flat top and put it into the game. Remember, this is an experimental machine, or a prototype machine. This is the schematics of it. So, you know, we can chop and change a little bit where we want, especially when it comes to the radar system. So for me, the ZSU-37-2 is the obvious pick when it comes to filling the gap of the 4.7 to the 7.7. Now, the next nation, Britain, has exactly the same issue. Now, it has from 4.7 to 7.7, we have the Crusader AA Mark I to the Falcon. Apart from, well, no, the same issue. The Crusader AA Mark I is not good at killing planes. It's not too bad at killing tanks, you know, 76mm a pen, but it ain't good at killing planes. So, same exact issue as the Soviets have. So, therefore, we have to find a tech tree equivalent. So, what is the tech tree equivalent from 4.7 to 7.7? Well, it's the big bad boy, the Skink, isn't it? The one which has the 420mm on it, the fast turrets, the Sherman chassis, the Grizzly chassis, and it should do pretty well, you know, at that BR. I mean, it would be very similar to how the Whirlwind and the M42 are, and those at a lower BR, which I believe they should be higher, but at a lower BR of around 3.7, they do really well. So for me, the Skink is the way to go. If you want more information on the history of the Skink or how it would fit in game, I did make a video on it about, a month or two ago, which, you know, you can find. If you just go to my channel and type in Skink, you'll find it. Or you can find I have a playlist. The playlist is called User Missions or User Models, and it is in there as well. The next one to have a look at is, of course, the Japanese. So, the Japanese, when it comes to the game, they have quite a lot of holes. The first one is from the Kami to the M24 Chaffee, so a big 2.0 gap, and also they have gaps, especially in their AA, you know, 3.3 to 6.7, 6.7 to 8.0, 1.7 to 3.3, quite large, but for me, the biggest gap is from the NATO to the Ho reproduction. Now, the Ho reproduction technically shouldn't even be in game, but it's here anyway, so let's have a chat. So 3.3 to 7.0. is a huge gap when we talk about performance. And one thing that, when you look at the tree, that the Japanese need around this BR is this idea of something around 4 to 5, which could go along with the Chiri 2, the M4A376. They need a little bit more power, and I think there is a lot of machines out there which could fill this. Now, the two that I've picked out, they follow the same ideas as some of the Japanese machines, and as I said, this is not me going from my personal opinion, this is going from the rules that have been set out from the game, and I'm using them to extrapolate, what machines would fit. So even though this machine here, the experimental 10 centimeter or 100 millimeter anti-tank SPG, the Kato, I'm advocating for it. I personally do not agree with it being in the game because they only created about 50% of the chassis before the war ended. So this machine never existed technically, but it is an upgraded NATO. It is just a Kato with a 100mm gun with a little bit more of movement on the gun itself compared to what we see from the NATO in-game. So this would fit perfectly in the gap that we see. It would have a slightly better engine. Obviously the 100mm would be a hell of a lot of fun, and it would be incredibly similar to what we see from the 88mm from the Germans, and when I say the 88mm, I mean the this thing, the Flak 37, would be very similar to the NATO as well, just doing a hell of a lot of damage. And I do think, this area should be filled with something, so that's what I would go with. The other machine, though, which could also be on the horizon, is this one. So this is the Type 10 120mm main gun. It's a long-barreled anti-tank or long-barreled naval gun that they stuck on a Type 97 Chiha chassis. They mounted it backwards, and as you can see, there's quite a lot of stress on said chassis. But this would take the form of very similar machines that we've seen from other nations, such as the German Waffenträger. They made an actual open-topped German Waffenträger where it just has a gun shield instead of, the turret that we see in-game, and that's basically what this would be. So if we're looking for a lot of firepower, and we're looking for a tank destroyer which can kind of just sit there and take pot shots, this would be the one to use. And this one was also built. I mean, we have pictures of it, we have some data on it, we know what the long barrel 120 is, and all of this. So for me, I would like to see this in game over the other machine, but I think this one is a lot more practical when we talk about a useful machine that could fit in this BR. So, the next one is Italy, and the main issue that Italy has is its rank 4. Now, I've so far ground through rank 1, 2, and 3, and then the festive event hit, so we took a little bit of a break. But even just looking at the tree, rank 5 is looking pretty good. There's a decent amount of stuff there. Rank 6, looking also pretty good. No Tenno vehicle, but that's fine. Looking at rank 1, 2, and 3, it's looking okay. Rank 3 is a bit sparse, but there's still a decent amount of vehicles, and, you got the 90s, so it's pretty good. You've also got this machine, so, we're all good. Rank 4, though, is 4 machines. This isn't good. This is bad. So we need to fill out rank 4. And the only way to really fill out rank 4 is we're looking at either end-of-war machines or slightly post-war machines. Like, disregarding these prototype monstrosities from, the 1970s and 1980s, what you're looking at is an M36B1, which is a post-war version of the M36, and 26A1, which I'm sure is a slight post-war version of the M26, so therefore we've got to look for something that's slight post-war or something that isn't slight post-war. Now, I know they've talked about a lot in Q&As where they don't want to put any German vehicles in the Italian trees because the Italians never actually used said German vehicles, But there was Italians fighting on the German side, especially after the armistice, who fought alongside and with these vehicles. So the vehicles I'm talking about are the ones that Germany sent to Italy to pretty much stop the Allied advance, and one of them is the Elephant. So the Elephant that you can see here is very similar to a machine we actually already have in game. The machine that we already have in game is the Ferdinand, right? So the Ferdinand was the first model, let's say, of the Elephant, and even though it has a machine gunner, it has no machine gun ports. So that is something to think about. But yeah, this is the Ferdinand that we have in game, and the differences mainly are a coaxial machine gun port here, and also you have a commander's cupola here for visibility. So those are the two main, outer physical differences. You could change the transmission a little bit, you could change the engine a little bit, but you would basically put another rank 4 vehicle into the Italian tree that, it could fit in. I think since Italy is in its early stages right now, I'm not really going to look at the other gaps that there are in the tree, because, there are quite a lot of gaps, like the M42 to the Saddam. But the main thing is right now is it's in its infancy, so we've got to give it some time, to just kind of relax and just, add vehicles over the next year, and then we'll see where it's at. The last vehicles, or the last nation, I should say, is France. And what France is missing, the two areas of France where I think there are general issues is from the 2 OBR to the 3-3. It's quite a large jump, but you can use this line of vehicles here to grind out the M4A1, the AMX-13 FL11, and then maybe the M10. So you can at least get a semblance of a 3-3-3-7 lineup. The major issue that was glaring to me when I ground through the French vehicles was the 5.7, the ARL-44. The ARL-44 is a wonderful tank to use, really fun. It reminds me, once again, of a Warhammer 40k machine, and it's got a great gun on it. The 90mm SA-45 is wonderful. The armor is not great, but if you actually get in a down tier, the armor on the turrets, and especially the upper glacis, can bounce some stuff, It can be really fun to use. But the problem is, there's no other 5.7 that the French have. So you either have to keep it as its own vehicle, add 5.7, and run just a bunch of 4.7s with it. The SA-50 can get up to pretty well, so, you could run it with that, but still, it's not good. You'd rather want some 5.7 stuff instead of some other things. So, for me, when I look at the ARL-44, I want to put vehicles with it. I want to try and add stuff to it which would make it more functional and have an actual, BR around it. Instead of having to up-tier it with the 6.0s of the CA Lorraine and the AMX-13, where the ARL-44, it does, as I said, it does well at its BR, it does well in a down tier. When it gets up-tiered, its gun is okay, but the whole premise of it is gone. The tank-destroying premise is pretty much done with it, and the armor is unsatisfactory. So, at 5.7, I would like to build a lineup around it. So the first thing to have a think about is the M4A2. So the French did use the M4A2. This means that we could stick it, here just to try and plug the gap, as I said, between the 2.0 to the 3.3. Add another vehicle in there, so it could actually create another solid lineup around it. The M4A2 is a 3.7 in the American tree, so you just stick it in here. That gives you another lineup you can run with your M10. The ones I would put around 5.7 though, first one, the AMX ELC. I've talked about this a lot. The AMX ELC series, the idea was to be a light vehicle, or light tank, or light Yeah, light vehicle I think is better. Reconnaissance idea, and it was another one of these chassis which was supposed to be a basic weapon system. So you could either put on this, the turret with the 90mm, you could stick on some ATGMs in an ATGM launcher, you could stick on some recoilless rifles, or you could stick on another 90mm in a different turret. But the whole idea was it was going to be quick, it was going to be small, it could support airdrops troops, and it would be able to once again fill the role similarly to the M22, the Tetrarch, and all of this other things. So with it, because it has the 90mm on it, and also because it can't turn fully backwards with its gun, I would love to see this machine in game, either as an event vehicle or as a standard tech tree one. And for me, I don't see it to be as good as the Char 25T or the AMX 1390. The AMX 13 I think should go down in BR, to be quite honest, but I see this with the 90 to not be as good as a lot of the machines that we see. So it could definitely be added to that bracket there. The other one is the Panhard EBR, and this one I know a lot of people want to see. And for me as well, it would be nice to see as well. We've seen it recently grace the floors of World of Tanks. It seems to be coming out as a premium over there. But what you're looking at is an 8-wheeled all-terrain vehicle with some crazy suspension and, of course, a very similar turret on it, which you may be used to. You know, the oscillating turret that we see on so many machines in the French tech tree. So this could be a good spot as well for the 5.7, the Panhard EBR. For me, if the issue with this machine and also the AMX ELC is the ammunition, well, they've said before that they can use ammunition as a balancing factor, so therefore just take away the ammunitions which are too good and stick them at 5.7 so the ARL 44 can actually have a lineup around it. But yeah, that is pretty much looking at each of the tech trees, looking at holes which I would personally like to be filled in the tech trees with these vehicles. Anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.